This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. I am not a doctor or registered nutritionist, and I do not provide medical advice. You are advised to do your own research and make decisions in partnership with your healthcare provider. If you're pregnant, nursing, have a medical condition, or are taking any medication, please consult your physician and do not go off any medication without consulting with your healthcare provider. Nothing in this podcast should be relied upon to determine dietary changes, a medical diagnosis, or course of treatment. Welcome to the Slightly Greener Life podcast. This is your host, Tanya Harris. I am an award-winning environmental toxin expert, best-selling author, and mother of three. I created this podcast as a place to help busy moms ditch the overwhelm and start living a low-toxin life. Now, let's get into this week's episode. Welcome back to another episode of the Slightly Greener Life. I am so ready to dive into today's topic of why BPA-Free isn't always safer and what to use instead. In the last couple of weeks, we've talked about hormone disruptors and safer cookware, so I thought we'd stick in the kitchen and talk about BPA. BPA, which is short for bisphenol A, is an industrial chemical that's used to make polycarbonate, which is a hard, clear plastic, and it's used in many consumer products. But the surprising thing is that the biggest exposure to BPA is through foods and beverages. So who would have thought? And one of the reasons that our biggest exposure is through food is because one of the common places BPA is found is in canned foods, even in most aluminum beverage cans. And it's typically found in epoxy resins of the cans, which act as a protective lining on the inside of some of the metal-based food and beverage cans. But it's also found in other items in the kitchen. It's in plastic water bottles, plastic reusable water bottles, plastic food storage containers, plastic bowls and dishes, plastic utensils. You get the picture here. It's in a lot of things that surround our food. So let's talk real quick by doing a quick review of the endocrine disruptors, because BPA and the chemicals that we'll be talking about today are known to be endocrine disrupting chemicals. Then we'll talk about the health effects of BPA and why BPA-free isn't necessarily a safer option. And we'll end by jumping into my favorite part, which is always safer solutions. As with all of these podcast episodes that have a lot of this information, I'll have all of this info on my website at slightlygreener.com/episode 7. So let's start real quick with a review of endocrine disruptors. And if you listen to episode 5 of the podcast, all about endocrine disruptors, you'll remember that an endocrine disruptor is a chemical that interferes with our endocrine system, which is where our body's messengers, the hormones, are made. And these endocrine disruptors, which you may also hear them be called hormone disruptors, can interfere with hormone production in a few different ways. They can imitate hormones, they can block hormones and prevent them from doing their job, they can produce or secrete hormones when they're not needed, or they can even cause an over or underproduction of hormones. So if you can imagine a chemical getting in the way of a hormone trying to do its job, you can see where so many different health issues can crop up. And some of those health issues that endocrine disruptors are linked to are health effects such as weight gain, insulin resistance, diabetes, allergies, asthma, cardiovascular disease, increased cancer risk, thyroid problems, even some neurodevelopmental disorders, and they can even affect things such as hunger, mood, and sleep. And because BPA acts as an endocrine disruptor, it should be no surprise that these health effects are associated with it. And it is a xenoestrogen, which is a natural or synthetic compound introduced into the body that mimics the effects of estrogen or promotes its production. So basically, it messes with our estrogen and can mimic it. And studies have linked BPA to things like breast cancer, hormone disruption, reproductive disorders, heart disease, obesity, and insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome. And in addition to that, a study published in the Environmental Research Journal states that, quote, prenatal and childhood exposure to BPA have been linked to anxiety, depression, hyperactivity, and behavior issues in children. And another study from the Yale School of Medicine found that low doses of BPA can negatively affect brain function, which can then lead to learning disabilities and neurodevelopmental issues. So those are two other big concerns if you're like me and you have that in your family or if that's a concern. So in July 2012, the FDA amended its regulations to no longer provide for the use of BPA-based polycarbonate resins in baby bottles and sippy cups. But the problem with this is that companies started to phase BPA out in these and many other products. But what they're using to replace it with might not be any safer. So BPA, which again is short for bisphenol A, is commonly replaced now with BPS, which is bisphenol S, and bisphenol F, so BPF, which are structurally similar to BPA, and you can hear that even in their names. And because they're still members of the bisphenol family, they have similar, if not more potent, health effects. So while most of these studies said that more research needs to be done, the studies that have been done so far are a little alarming. So I'm going to go through just a few here and just know that when we get through this, there are solutions. So I just wanted to read some of these because I like to help you be an educated consumer and to know how and why you are avoiding some of these products. So here we go. A 2020 study published in Environmental International discovered that at age 7, children whose mothers had higher levels of chemicals in their bodies during pregnancy had lower IQ scores. This had a greater impact on boys whose scores were 2 points lower. Of all the chemicals studied in that study, the largest contribution to lower IQ was attributed to bisphenol F, one of the substitutes. A 2022 study in environmental health concluded that BPS and BPF exposure may also have the ability to disrupt the endocrine system and alter levels of sex hormones, again, suggesting that BPF and BPS might not be safer substitutions for BPA. Exposure to BPF and BPS is associated with asthma and hay fever. And in 2020, the journal Nutrients stated that BPS is likely more toxic and seems to cause more pathologies in the reproductive system than BPA or any of the other BPA derivatives. And BPA was also demonstrated to be more toxic to the reproductive system than BPA and was shown to hormonally promote certain breast cancers at the same rate as BPA. And BPS was shown to decrease sperm motility and was also found to decrease sperm production at a concentration that's 10 times lower than other bisphenol derivatives. And that same journal article stated that a 2019 clinical and observational study found that both BPS and BPA-F, which is another BPA substitute, at those levels were significantly related to gestational diabetes. And here are just a couple of more quick facts that have to do with children and these BPA and BPA substitutes. The researchers published a study in the journal Pediatric Research that concluded that when children are exposed to bisphenols, and BPS was mentioned with this, and phthalates, which are another type of endocrine disrupting chemical that's often used in plastics, that it can cause harmful effects in their bodies. And these effects included things like oxidant stress, which can harm cells and organs. It can also lead to insulin resistance, which means the body has trouble using sugar properly and can lead to diabetes. Another effect they found is called albuminuria, which is a sign of kidney damage. And lastly, these chemicals can also cause problems with how the blood vessels work, which can lead to health problems down the road, such as heart attack or stroke. And for the last one, a 2019 study published in the Journal of Endocrine Society analyzed U.S. National Health and Nutrition Examination surveys to look at the relationship between exposure to chemicals such as BPA, BPS, and BPF, and body mass in children and adolescents aged 6 to 19. The study found that a high percentage of children had detectable levels of BPS and BPF, and that increased BPS levels were associated with a higher likelihood of obesity in children, and BPF was linked to being overweight and having abdominal obesity. And this is the last one. The journal Nutrients stated that, quote, interestingly, every report examined here does state that BPS caused pathological changes when compared to controls, without exception, end quote. They also stated that BPS is likely to be more toxic and seems to cause more pathologies in the reproductive system than the original BPA or any of the other BPA derivatives. I could go on and on with these studies, but again, for time's sake, we'll stick with these. And I know I just gave you a lot. I have more info in my membership and also on my website, but because I don't want this to be a forever long episode, I'll just stop at these. Plus, I think we get the picture here that BPS and BPF are most likely not safer options than BPA. So if you'd like to see these studies, I will link to them on my website at slightlygreener.com/episode 7. So here's a brief review of where BPA can be found in the kitchen before we go on to safer solutions. Again, in canned foods and beverages, things like reusable plastic water bottles, plastic food storage containers, plastic cooking utensils, and plastic dish and serverware. And of course, things like sippy cups and baby bottles, unfortunately. They might be phased out of the BPA, but they might contain some of these substitutes. So here's what we've been waiting for. This section is all on solutions. So some of these are tougher than others to do, and I totally get that, but just remember to do as much as you're comfortable with to start and then work your way up from there. So the first thing that I recommend doing is avoiding canned foods and drinks. And this probably, unfortunately, even goes for canned foods that say they're BPA-free. And avoid plastic bottles and food storage containers, even if you see the word BPA-free labeled on them somewhere. If they're still plastic, one of those bisphenol substitutes was most likely used. And so I recommend using glass or stainless steel options instead. And there's great brands out there too. Things like Stanley's popular right now, stainless steel. Life Factory, which is glass with a silicone sleeve around it. I really like those. And Swell Bottle all have great drink options, and they have some food storage options as well. And again, I really like that Life Factory because even though it's glass, it has a silicone sleeve around it. So it's not easily breakable because trust me, I have accidentally put it to the test more than once. But those are some of my favorite options. I also like glass Snapware as a food storage container. It's a great place to start for replacing food storage containers. And just keep in mind that the lids are plastic. So I always recommend not replacing the lid until the food is cooled off. And then don't let the plastic lid touch the food. Or you can use something like beeswax to cover it, or use a cloth bowl to cover the food too. And again, don't worry about replacing all of it right away. Just start out with your most used containers and your favorite water bottles and replace those first, and then work your way up from there. And as for the plastic containers, the good news is if you can't part with all of them, or you have a few sizes you like, say for lunches, you can keep those because you can definitely store dry foods like pretzels or cereal or chips in there. Those are fine. Just no heat and no hot foods. And that leads me to the next point of do not microwave plastic or put it into the dishwasher. And that's because chemicals can leach into foods and beverages when the container or the reusable water bottle or plastic utensil is exposed to heat, or if it's heated, either through washing dishes or being in the dishwasher, or if you're microwaving it. Even if you're leaving something in a hot car, like a regular water bottle, anything like that, any type of heat can help those chemicals leach into your food or beverage faster. And one great question I get asked about quite a bit that I thought I'd mention really quick is what to do if somebody has left bottled water in the car, like in a hot car. Can they go home and put it in the refrigerator? Is that fine then? And unfortunately, the answer is no, because once that heated up, it leached the chemicals. So I would unfortunately advise recycling that if you can, tossing that bottled water. Another thing you can do is to remove the plastic lid when drinking hot liquids, again, because of heating up the plastic in those lids. Also do this with to-go cups. And then when it comes to using plastic cooking utensils, you can replace those with a wood or bamboo or a stainless steel option. And then I know that this was a tough one too, but if you can replace plastic kids' plates and silverware and sippy cups, those are also good ideas. And I know that this was a tough one for me back in the day because they're so cute. I literally had trouble parting with some of them, but they're not worth the health risk. And I'll add some safer brands that I recommend on my website. So again, I'll say it again, slightlygreener.com/episode 7. I'll also recap all these tips there because I know that this was a lot of information. And I just want you to keep remembering, if you can't replace everything all at once, don't get so overwhelmed that you don't want to do any of this, because just replace 1 or 2 items at a time. Always do your most used, most toxic items first, and then slowly work your way up. And The same goes for baby bottles. Glass and stainless steel with silicone or natural rubber nipples are better options. And again, I'll add some of those safer recommended brands on my site. The last tip I have is to cook with fresh fruits and vegetables as often as you can instead of using those canned foods. Do fresh as often as possible. All right, so I know I threw a lot at you here, but I do want you to know the why behind the how, if that makes sense. I don't want to just tell you, trust me, you want to avoid this stuff. I want to give you the studies and the facts so that you can be an educated consumer because it's tricky out there. And if you've heard BPA is bad, you might buy a plastic food container that says BPA-Free. And who wouldn't? It sounds safer. I know I've done it. But now that you know it most likely contains a substitute with similar health effects, you know you probably don't want to buy it. Okay, so that's it for today. Don't forget, if you want to see these tips and get some safer brand recommendations, visit my website at slightlygreener.com/episode 7. And thank you so much for joining me for another episode of The Slightly Greener Life. I'll see you next week. Are you tired of trying to figure out which ingredients are safe and which products are truly safer? The Slightly Greener membership is here to help you eliminate any guesswork. With an easy step-by-step process and a supportive community, you'll learn how to transition into a low-toxic lifestyle with just a few small changes at a time. This membership will provide you with the knowledge, tools, and support you need to keep your home looking and feeling healthy without turning your lifestyle upside down. You'll learn which ingredients to avoid and which brands are truly safer so that your search for safe products becomes easy and automatic. Imagine being able to make simple swaps that significantly reduce toxins in your home without sacrificing convenience or comfort. No more hours of researching trying to find safe products and no more guessing. I'll take the guesswork and hours of research off your plate, leaving you with more time to enjoy living a low-toxin lifestyle. Join the membership today and be free of worrying if your products may contain hidden toxic chemicals or worse, greenwashed formulas that are marketed as all natural or eco-friendly that turn out to be anything but. So empower yourself with this knowledge so that you can keep your family safe while saving money, time, and your sanity. Find out more at slightlygreener.com/membership. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Slightly Greener Life podcast. Please take a moment to subscribe to the show. And then be sure to share it with a friend who you know wants simple steps to living in this complex world. I'll see you next time.